The story of David and Goliath is one of the most well-known narratives in the Bible, and it has captured the imagination of generations for thousands of years. The tale, as recorded in 1 Samuel 17, tells of a young David, armed only with a sling and stones, defeating the giant Goliath in battle, saving Israel from the Philistines. However, when we read further into the Bible, specifically in 2 Samuel 21 verse 19, we encounter a puzzling statement. This verse says that someone named Elhanan killed Goliath, not David. This seems to directly contradict the earlier account, and the discrepancy has led many scholars and readers to question which version is correct. Let's start by reviewing the passages in question. In 1 Samuel 17, David kills Goliath, the giant Philistine warrior from the city of Gath. Goliath is described as a terrifying figure, standing over 9 feet tall, who taunts and challenges the Israelites to send a champion to fight him. David, a shepherd boy at the time, volunteers to fight Goliath, despite his inexperience in battle. With a single stone from his sling, David strikes Goliath in the forehead, killing him instantly, and then cuts off Goliath's head with the giant's own sword. This story is not just about a battle, it's a story of faith. David credits his victory to God, showing that faith in God can overcome even the greatest of challenges. But the issue arises when we read 2 Samuel 21 verse 19, which says, "In another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elhanan son of Jair, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod." This passage states that Elhanan, not David, killed Goliath. So, how can this contradiction be explained? If Goliath was killed by David in 1 Samuel, how could Elhanan kill him later in 2 Samuel? Goliath could not have been killed twice. To further complicate things, in 1 Chronicles 20 verse 5, we read that Elhanan killed Lami, the brother of Goliath, which adds a third version of events. The verses read, "In another battle with the Philistines, Elhanan son of Jair killed Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod." This apparent contradiction has led to different interpretations over time. Some scholars suggest that there may have been 2 Philistine warriors named Goliath, which would explain how both David and Elhanan could each have killed someone named Goliath. However, this theory is not widely accepted because the Goliath mentioned in 2 Samuel 21 is also described as being from Gath, the same city as the Goliath David killed. It seems unlikely that 2 warriors from the same city with the same name and description would appear in the same biblical narrative. Others believe that the story of Elhanan killing Goliath is actually the original story, and that over time, the heroic act was attributed to David as part of his rise to fame and legend. According to this view, David's encounter with Goliath may have been a later addition to the biblical text, turning the historical figure of Elhanan into a minor character and elevating David's role as the hero who saved Israel. In this case, the original story of Elhanan would have been preserved in 2 Samuel 21, while the legendary version featuring David would be found in 1 Samuel 17. But this interpretation has its issues. The text of 2 Samuel 21 verse 19 itself seems to show signs of corruption or scribal error. Many scholars believe that the confusion arises from a simple textual mistake. In the original Hebrew, small changes in letters or words could result in significant differences in meaning. For example, in Hebrew, the word for brother looks very similar to the word that is used to mark the direct object of a sentence. It's possible that in copying the text over the centuries, a scribe made a mistake, omitting the word brother in 2 Samuel 21 verse 19, which would explain why the passage says Elhanan killed Goliath instead of Goliath's brother. This view is supported by the fact that 1 Chronicles 20 verse 5 specifies that Elhanan killed Goliath's brother, not Goliath himself. Scholars like V. Phillips Long and Caspar Olay argue that the text of 1 Chronicles likely preserves the original reading and that the version in 2 Samuel 21 verse 19 has been corrupted over time. Additionally, the phrase son of Jair in 2 Samuel 21 verse 19 may have been altered by scribes as well. The name Jair is very similar to the Hebrew word for weaver, and some believe that the name of Elhanan's father was confused with the description of Goliath's spear, which is compared to a weaver's rod. This kind of scribal error is not uncommon in ancient manuscripts. The Bible was copied by hand for centuries, and while the scribes were generally very careful, mistakes did occasionally happen, especially with words that look or sound alike. In this case, it seems that the scribe copying 2 Samuel 21 verse 19 may have accidentally written Goliath instead of the brother of Goliath. Further supporting this idea is the fact that there is another Elhanan mentioned in 2 Samuel 23 verse 24, who is described as a Bethlehemite, just like David. This has led some to suggest that the two Elhanans mentioned in the Bible might actually be the same person. The Elhanan who killed Goliath's brother could have been a warrior from Bethlehem, much like David himself. And it's possible that over time, the lines between the two figures became blurred in the tradition. Some skeptics, however, remain unconvinced by the scribal error explanation and argue that we are dealing with two competing traditions. They suggest that the version in 1 Samuel 17 is a later, legendary addition to the story of David, while the original version in 2 Samuel 21 verse 19 reflects the true history of Elhanan's victory over Goliath. These skeptics point out that ancient texts were often fluid and subject to change as they were passed down through generations. And it's possible that the story of David and Goliath was shaped by the desire to elevate David as a national hero. However, this explanation is more complex and assumes a greater degree of invention in the biblical text than the scribal error theory. It's more straightforward to assume that the problem in 2 Samuel 21 verse 19 arises from a minor textual corruption rather than from the existence of two conflicting traditions about who killed Goliath. Additionally, it is unlikely that the author of 1 Samuel, after carefully crafting the detailed and dramatic story of David's battle with Goliath, would then include a contradictory account just a few chapters later without noticing the discrepancy. The idea that the author of 1 Chronicles invented a brother of Goliath to resolve the contradiction also seems less likely than the theory of a simple scribal error. The work of scholars like V. Phillips Long and Caspar Olay strengthens the case for the scribal error explanation. They point out that the differences between the texts of 2 Samuel 21 verse 19 and 1 Chronicles 20 verse 5 are minimal, and the most plausible explanation is that a copyist made an accidental change in the wording. The Hebrew words for Bethlehemite and Lami, the brother of Goliath, are very similar in appearance and sound, making it easy to see how a scribe might confuse the two. To summarize, the most reasonable explanation for the apparent contradiction between 1 Samuel 17 and 2 Samuel 21 verse 19 is that it was the result of a scribal error. David did indeed kill Goliath, and Elhanan killed Goliath's brother, as recorded in 1 Chronicles 20 verse 5. This resolves the issue without needing to resort to the idea of two separate traditions or legends. The Bible is a rich and complex text, and like any ancient manuscript, it has been subject to the occasional copying mistake. But when we take into account the historical context, textual evidence, and the work of biblical scholars, we can confidently conclude that David was the one who killed Goliath, while Elhanan killed his brother.
If you found this video enjoyable, please consider liking and sharing it. Additionally, subscribing to this channel will ensure that you receive more updates in the future. Thank you.